right now about Raila Odinga's strategy, using that Pentagon idea, getting key political figureheads from various parts of the countries where he thinks there is a lot of, where the vote basket is rich to try and, power his presidential bid. He did that in 2007. Musalia Mudavadi was part of that Pentagon. But it has not worked in 2007, 2013, in 2017, and as far as getting Raila Odinga elected is concerned. There are issues in 2007, obviously, that has been documented well over the years. In 2013 as well, there were election petitions in 2013 and 2017. But gentlemen, let's put it, let's analyze it from a political science point of view. Let me start with you, Dismas. You have followed, obviously, this issue for long. Is it fair to say today that that idea by Raila Odinga of using that Pentagon, like in 2007, he had the likes of Ruto and Musalia Mudavadi, Najib Balala, Joseph Nyaga, Pentagon. It was a bungled election. In 2013, it was the kind of same formula in 2017 as well, Pandit say. Do you think it is fair or correct to say that it has failed?
Well, actually, there are two answers to that question.
Right.
Yes and no. Let's begin with, yes, Kenya is a tribal society. So for you to win an election, you have to get the tribal leaders. We may want to sanitize that, but all our political parties are anchored on tribal leaders who are able to get everybody to come on board, either by running with facts or by assaulting democracy and running with negative fears and manipulating the system. So for Raila, he's been able to put up those teams very well, and they seem to have delivered. Again, questions arise whether or not he's won elections or he has lost. Maybe that's a discussion for another day. But the biggest challenge Raila Odinga has today with the Pentagon is that while he's the majority shareholder in all these operations, he doesn't treat the other shareholders with any level of respect. And for the longest time, Raila Odinga has operated in an environment where it's his word or the highway. So he loves to take decisions on his own motion. So for the rest of you, you're supposed to come on board and buttress the decision. If you don't like the decision, a few days to the election, he'll massage you. But as soon as the election has taken place, then he's very happy to kick you out. For the situation we have today, it would be very naive for anybody to imagine that all the four principles are equal. Of course, they cannot be equal. Raila has been the biggest shareholder. But there is an inherent agreement that he must treat the other three principles with the highest level of respect. And you recall, before the election, all of them used to have a meeting.
Should it be as equals?
I mean, it's the first among equals. You've entered into an agreement, you know that you are a majority shareholder, but when you go to the board and you are four guys, every person carries one vote. Never mind that you could be having 70% of the shareholding, but you've agreed in principle that when you go to the boardroom, every person carries one vote. Before the elections, that mattered. You would consult them on all major serious decisions. But after the August 8th election, people close to both Raila Odinga and the other principals say when he took the decision to boycott the election, he took the decision alone. He did not consult the other persons. And then, of course, when he went to meet with President Kenyatta for the handshake, he did not consult the other person. So maybe the question is Raila comfortable in a group where he has to entertain divergent views, where he has to consult? From his actions the last few days, probability is no. He doesn't want divergent views. That's why he says, I'm going to meet with the president, whether or not my other principles are in agreement. I'm going to cut a deal, whether or not my other principles are in agreement.
All right.
So that's number one. And then number two, it would be, again, very naive of us to imagine that those senators decided to wake up in the morning and found Moses Wetangula and Pleasant, a sad face at the Senate, and said, let's kick him out. If it's actually the case, then people in ODM should be worried that Raila Odinga has lost control over ODM. But it cannot be the case because Raila is ODM and ODM is Raila Odinga. So he's the one who is coming up with all those schemes. And you must look at it that Raila Odinga is not just Raila Odinga. He's an institution, he's an enigma, he's an idea. And he's celebrated for having three famous handshakes. He started with President Moi, then he came with President Kibaki, and then now with President Kenyatta, is the common denominator. Now, the question people are asking themselves, especially guys who are concerned about our national interest and our public interest, is how long is our going concern as Kenya going to be pegged on Raila's handshake? Because it's the common denominator. When you had issues with Moi, there was a handshake. people broke into a dance and song
Right.
with Kibaki and with Kenyatta. So the question is, when Raila Odinga is going for that handshake, whose interest is he serving? Is he serving his personal, selfish interest, or is he serving the interest of our nation, Kenya?
Right.
And I think that's the question people need to answer.
Okay.
But as it emerges, there are questions. If you go through the newspapers today, the new minority leader at the Senate, Senator James Orengo, at a funeral in Game, has said that there needs to be consultation, that the trip the president was supposed to make to Kisumu, again, which is the ODM bedrock, has to be put on hold so that people can engage in consultations. And the same James Orengo said Raila Odinga did not need to consult anybody before going to Arambe House for that handshake. But now he comes back, he says the issues of compensation, electoral injustices that need to be sorted out before we can make progress. And there are also reports, again, one doesn't know whether it's now fake news, alternative facts, or Cambridge Analytica in place, who are saying that Ambassador Kimani and Paul Mwangi were supposed to have a news conference on Friday, and at the 11th hour, it was called off. So, again, you are beginning to ask yourself, from the time there was the handshake,
Right.
about 2 weeks later, there is no movement. What is happening? Is somebody deciding
So your
to
point
do a
is
runner?
he doesn't do well in a group dynamic. He makes all the decisions and renders the group irrelevant.
It's very easy to come to that conclusion. Anybody who's ever had a divergent view with Raila Odinga has suffered. You start with Senator Orengo. When he decided to support a Charity Ngilu, he found himself back in the village. You go to Anyang' Nyong'o. When he decided to support Charity Ngilu, he found himself bleeding. If you meet many ODM senators, and there's one again according to newspaper reports from Taita Taveta, Jones Mwaruma, he said to have taken Raila head-on during the meeting at Pan-Africa, saying, you are now coming to consult us, but when you went to meet with the President Kenyatta, you did not bother to consult us. What is happening?
Right.
And you know, it would be interesting for political scientists, and maybe even Raila Odinga himself, to come and tell us once that his selfish interests are actually consistent with our public interest and national interest.
All right, good question. I would be glad to ask him that if I meet him. Mark, I've heard you comment about this issue. What do you think is the correct winning formula?
First, before we talk about winning formulas, let's talk about what the Pentagon idea espouses. It espouses that, number one, you can take the Luya community, invest it in one person, and say you have a block, and take the Kisii community similarly and put it there. It actually, unfortunately, entrenches tribalism. It immediately becomes a battalion of tribes versus another battalion of tribes. That is one unfortunate result of that particular instance. In fact, it is part of the reason why he loses these particular elections, because what happens is he forgets, while he's consolidating other tribes in Raila mania, on the other side, Raila phobia rises up more. And if you look at the numbers, there's always a 2% more from the Raila phobia side coming out to register and vote versus the Raila mania side, because the excitement seems to capture them and they forget to register. So the fact of the matter is that on an ethical standpoint, the net result of the Pentagon formations, whether you look at the 2007 violence, the 2013 for 2 weeks, we did not go to work because we were scared what's going to happen at the petition. 2018, let's not even talk about it. So the fact of the matter is the Pentagon arrangement does indeed increase tribalism and tense political environments in this country. Second reason why it does not work is because at the end of the day, you're keeping your supporters guessing as to who is going to be the flag bearer until the last minute. Okay, so you have someone who was deeply Kalonzo Musyoka in 2017, who was waiting for Kalonzo to receive the ticket, and did not. Kalonzo does not receive the ticket, and there's disappointment. And the list goes on down to Etangula, Mudavadi, and even what's his name, the CCM guy, I forget his name, Ruto, Isaac, and therefore, it doesn't work because the very nature of your Pentagon arrangement disenfranchises people. It disenfranchises them so much to the extent that if the Luya nation was considered an investor in NASA, and had NASA had won, then there would have been still the lesser among equals. They were going to be chief minister and assistant chief minister. And those are the issues that happen in a Pentagon arrangement. Now, what is the winning formula? The winning formula on an ethical standpoint is we as a nation need to look at two parties that have actually done the right thing, ODM and Jubilee. ODM has MPs from the coast, Turkana, the whole nation. You can see the country dotted with the orange. You can see the country the same manner dotted with Jubilee. What we need to do is close these tribal outfits that can only field candidates from one particular tribe. That is an ethical question we have to answer.
Like which ones?
Wiper. Ford Kenya. I know they have specs here and there, but those are creatures of accidents. You know, they're outliers.
But if you compare Ford ODM and not Ford Kenya,
yes,
with ODM, Ford Kenya was a properly founded party.
Keyword was.
So what is ODM or what is Jubilee?
You see, here's the thing. Right now, I'm saying in this context, the parties that deserve that statement Kenya at the end of the name. You see, I would not have a problem if it was Ford Bukusu, Wiper Kamba. That's fine.
Do you think Jubilee was also founded on a tribal foundation?
No, but you see, here's the thing. You might argue that they were founded on a tribal formation and Ford Kenya was not. But that's like saying that the Democrats supported slavery and the Republicans did not. At the end of the day, today, Democrats embrace more black people than Republicans. So the history is not as irrelevant as the current reality. And the current reality, if we were to look at nationalistic parties, the only parties that would qualify is Jubilee and ODM. Now, what is interesting for me is if you look at many of the voting blocks in this country, for once, we did not have too many blocks voting just one side. We have Kisii that split its vote. We have Luyaland split its votes. We have the whole country where people had to choose between Jubilee and ODM and NASA ostensibly, yet they were from one family. Democracy is where a father and mother can choose different parties and children can... We cannot have political parties where when they meet, it sounds like a cousin meeting. Wepuhulu, Wekesa, Shikuku, you know, that's a political party meeting. What's that?
You have vendetta against Ford Kenya. All right. Hesbon, what is your take on this? And we digress, but it's a wide and interesting topic. But what is your take on the issue of the Pentagon idea?
I think we need to be fair on Raila and the Pentagon idea because it has worked for Kenyans. In 2002, I think I was just about to join campus, and I saw Raila come up with the summit, which gave us the National Rainbow Alliance coalition, and it worked for Kenyans. And I think in 2003, Kenyans were the most optimistic people all over the world. And we expected a lot from that government. We got something, and I think we need to give credit to that summit, which gave birth to the subsequent Pentagons. In 2013, I think it failed for obvious reasons, and this has been debated in 2007, and we know what happened. And basically that informs the handshake between President Mwai Kibaki and Raila Odinga. So when Dismas talks about selfish interest, I think we need to situate that broadly, that the country was in turmoil. So that handshake back then was very critical. Now come to 2013 to 2017, again, the idea of the Pentagon worked because I think CORD, sustained the government as an oversight of whatever the government was doing throughout the 5 years. And if you ask President Uhuru Kenyatta today that they did a good job, because every other thing that the government was going to do overboard or not doing, I think CORD raised its voice. And we must give credit to that formation. So to come back to the Pentagon and the failures that they've had, I think from where I sit, I would want to sympathize with the Right Honorable Raila Odinga, because when you are a reformist, and I think that this is how he has cut himself, and it takes so long for you to ascend to power, you tend to start accommodating, other individuals who may not be cut from the same ideology. And to a large extent, you look at the formation of the pentagons that he's had. I mean, sometimes you'd look at the Pentagon and just say that, these guys don't have the same ideology, I would be a lot more comfortable with a Pentagon formed by Raila Odinga, where I see people who are cut from the same ideology, The original Ford had an ideological underpinning to it. And if you look at the heavyweights back then, they were from all over the country. And I think over time, because of ethnicity, they've been forced to retreat back to their tribal cocoons. And that then tells you why our politics, because of its balkanized nature, means that now you have to form a Pentagon based on somebody who is a heavyweight from a certain Balkan, or from a certain tribe. And you cannot blame Raila for that, that if a politician emerges, whether they are cut from the same ideological cloth or not, if they can help Kenyans get that change, then why not? It has not worked a few instances, but I think I celebrate the times that it has worked. The Grand Coalition government did a lot for Kenyans. The handshake between Raila and Moi did a lot for Kenyans. And right now where we are, you want to ask yourself, is it that Raila has failed in the Pentagon, or he was part and parcel of a group that had people who did not share his ideology? It is not about selfish interest. And anyone who is talking about selfish interest is probably trying to imagine what will happen, because we don't know. I mean, there are two people who are charged, very brilliant Kenyans, to frame the issues that are going to be discussed. I think here, this must mention that when you have Senator Orengo as the minority leader, then you have somebody as the minority leader who you can manipulate. And it's the same Dismas who has said that Orengo in a funeral has come out and said that victims must be compensated, yes, dialogue must be enshrined. There is a certain level of the table where you cannot bring everyone. But Orengo is alive to the fact that it reaches a point where having divergent views is very important. What President Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga did when they came up with the handshake was to incubate an idea, and they've now passed it, to a Pastor Kimani and Raila's lawyer to work out the issues and frame them for discussion. So you cannot say that it's selfish interests, because, again, it is the interest of the people. And it seems like Raila realized that the idea of the Pentagon, as he had it in NASA, was not going to help him achieve the interest of Kenyans. All right.
So it is a matter of there being some weak links as far as sharing that vision is concerned.
I would say so.
Mutinda?
I think this issue of Pentagon has come up as a result of our tribal politics. And it is always an effort towards bringing certain blocks together against other blocks that are perceived not to be in line with the political ideology and interests of this other group. And, Hesbon has used the 202 example. I don't think that would be the best example, first because that was one of the least tribal campaigns that I have ever participated in. Because if you remember very well, in 202, it was Uhuru Kenyatta Akikuyu versus Moi Kibaki Akikuyu.
No, I just say that the Pentagon worked then.
So that's why I want to dispel that, because it was more about change versus status quo. It had very little to do with issues of tribe. Actually, majority of the Kikuyus, even then, voted for Kibaki, because people had gotten fatigued by 24 years of a system that people were feeling like was no longer serving them. So most Kenyans at that point went for who represents change and who represents continuity. It happened probably for political expediency that most of the political figures in the country then went for change, because also the ground, I believe, was also ripe for change. Come in 2007, that probably is the best example we can use for Pentagon being a strategy to rally around communities. Because if you remember very well, there was a silent 41 versus 1 campaign in 2005. I was in 2007. I was actively involved in that campaign, and I remember that very, very well, because the narrative was that we came together and supported Kibaki Akikuyu, but they've turned around and isolated the rest of us. So the rest of us have to come together and get them out of power and agree how we are going to. That was in 2007. And probably it is also the best example of when the Pentagon almost succeeded. Actually, if, for instance, Kalonzo had not opted out of that team, there was no way they were going to lose. The figures speak for themselves, even the disputed figures. If you put them together, it was clear that the person who had the swing vote then was Kalonzo Musyoka. But he went out with this tribal bloc, and we almost had a tie. It is a fact that,
Yes, it is,
you know, it was a...
But who left?
It is Kalonzo who left.
It was one party. It was one party, ODM.
Yeah, he left with his certificate. Let's put it that way. If you want for clarity's sake,
with a number of with some voters.
Maanzo had been the one who was the custodian, and he happened to be loyal to Kalonzo. So when there was a fallout as to who is going to be the presidential candidate, Maanzo, with the blessings of his boss, disappeared. But you saw the vote in the way it came was mostly very tribal. Actually, it was this bloc that was led by Kibaki versus the coalition that had been brought together by Raila. In 2013, if you look at the Pentagon then, there was an element of, you know, trying to bring together tribal blocs and also sentimental reasons, you know. Like Joe Nyaga, for instance, I don't think anybody expected Joe Nyaga to bring a big bloc from his region when we had Uhuru Kenyatta, but for purposes of, you know, face of the country, inclusivity. Let me say this, inclusivity, because one of the issues, and even today, you note that one of the bones of contention is inclusivity. That among the things that NASA says should be discussed is issues of electoral justice. Number two is inclusivity. So this issue of inclusivity in our politics has always been there. Okay. And it is out of that certain politicians want to give the picture that they are more inclusive than the others. But like Mark correctly put, then in that strategy, then there are also those who are targeted and who feel isolated and who also in their own way react. And probably that reaction out of fear, out of the siege mentality that people are ganging out of us, ends up mobilizing more than this other one that is antagonistic. Right. So I think going forward, one thing again we have to give to Raila, as much as we also have to give to Jubilee, it is also him who is starting to break this up. Because for instance, ODM today cannot, honestly, with all fairness, cannot be called a Luo party. There was a time that Raila was a Luo political leader when he was heading a party called NDP. But over time, he has metamorphosized and he is no longer leading a party that can be called a Luo party. Because we know that there is the Luos, yes. Right. We have a very big chunk of the coastal region. Yes. We have a very big chunk of Western. So, like Mark correctly put then, probably there are two papers. Then we also have Jubilee.
We're out of time.
Jubilee is also moving towards that. And I want to mention it because it's commendable. That is one of the ways that we can reduce this issue of balkanizing our country using ethnic blocks whenever it comes to politics. Because right now we know that Jubilee is predominantly Gema. It's predominantly Rift Valley. But it has got large pockets from other regions like the Kisii.
But many pundits agree that it got there northeastern through the back door, like collapsing many parties to pretend you're one party.
No, not necessarily
ODM,
pretending.
One party.
That's why I've said with time, you have to give credit that he has metamorphosized over time from a Luo party to a multi-ethnic political party.
All right. Yes,
now, Ben, you pays the piper calls the tune. And this message goes to Ambassador Kimanda and Paul Mwangi, that when they're framing the questions for the discussions or engagement between President Kenyatta and Raila Odinga, they must come up with a program that responds to the interests of the entire nation, Kenya, that do not respond to the people who've given them instructions. Because the big question that we keep on asking till the cows come home is whether President Kenyatta's selfish interest and Raila's selfish interest are consistent with the interest of the nation. The only time we can be able to establish that is when you've got an all-inclusive process where everybody comes on